Hey guys, it's Kromdar here, back with another video, this time of a Necrotic Wake 12. This dungeon was relatively unproblematic for us. We do have some very strong DPS in our group, so we end up going through it relatively easily without even placing our Pridefuls very well. A good route here is difficult to nail down. We start by pulling the two packs together. Patchwork Soldiers bolster, the Blight Bags don't, and overall this pull is relatively easy on the healing, so not a lot of danger going out here. During this pull, if you're a priest, you actually want to Mind Soothe the guy I'm about to Mind Soothe for my druid to pick up the hammer, which is on the right, and I'll be doing that here. The Corpse Harvester gets Mind Soothed. This pull here is also relatively easy. Since it's bolstering, we just take it easy, we don't pull huge packs together. It is a 12, and it's important that mechanics are done even on trash here, such as drain fluids, needs to be interrupted, which my rogue takes care of. All the pulls, I try my best to start with spreading Purge the Wicked to ideally all targets, and keeping up on all targets, as that is by far the highest DPS ability that Disc Priests have. So if you're struggling with HPS, you may want to do your best keeping up Purge the Wicked on all targets in combat, unless it's like 20 plus. For the next pack, we just pull the Blight Bags alone. They can explode on death, and they do a bit of party-wide damage, which can be problematic if combined with mechanics of other packs. So we just take it easy, bring down the Blight Bags here. As you can see, they're starting to do some party-wide damage. Ends up being around 50% on the whole party. And the next pull should be spawning Prideful for us, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it does. Okay. Again, interrupting Corpse Harvesters, Drain Fluids is quite important. That's our top prior for this pack. If that is done correctly, this pack is really not an issue. As you can see, I barely have to do healing here. Regarding this dungeon, the first boss is relatively easy if positioned correctly. The second boss is actually one of the biggest problems in the whole dungeon. I personally consider it to be the most difficult boss in this whole dungeon, and you will later see why. As we wrap up this pack, we spawn Prideful, which we're going to take care of in this corner here. And as you can see, we have some bolstering stacks, so prio damage on targets, on really healthy targets, is really important this week in order to avoid big bolstering trash mobs, which can rival HP pools of bosses that we've had a few cases in our other dungeons. Again, here we do our best to line up on a diagonal in order to avoid moving altogether. As you can see now, we're kind of all on one diagonal, and the Prideful swirlies can never hit us. For Prideful healing, on these difficulties, Radiance, Spaced Out, and Atonement healing is more than enough. Towards the end, I prefer to spam Shadow Mends a bit in order to avoid having the whole party at 10% HP. And with Prideful, we go immediately into the boss fight. We activate the Goliath by using our Kyrians in the party for the Arcane Orb. It's important to keep in mind that the Arcane Orb only damages in melee, pretty much, so even if you're ranged, you have to stand in melee to get the benefits of having a Kyrian in this party. Naturally, we Time Warp this. The person who gets the vomit on him is isolated because the boss fixates on that person, and that just has to be healed through. The ads also have to be killed immediately. If they are left alive, they will explode, and that will be unhealable party-wide damage. So we take care of that quickly. With Prideful, Time Warp, PI, all cooldowns, this boss really is not a problem though. This is by far the easiest boss in the whole dungeon. We start running out of space here slowly, and as you can see, we keep attention with the vomit. The patrol was kind of close there at one point, and we were lucky not to pull it. Taking care of the ads again. And we're actually not sure at which point the boss resets. There must be a certain point where he'll just disappear and reset to his initial position. So we're kind of scared of it. We finish kiting me here, and after this we start repositioning towards the other end of the corridor, which is not optimal, but unfortunately on Tyrannical you start slowing down on the damage on the boss kills. They start taking some time naturally, and you need some new creative strategies for it. As a Disc Priest, I think here your biggest job is to just help DPS. As you can see here, my DPS is that of the tank. It's very important that you help DPS here so the boss goes down faster. It is only 2.5k DPS, but if you look at the total number, that's around 250k on the boss, which actually is quite substantial on every boss fight. Here we take care of the Patchwork Soldiers alone, these bolsters, so we just melt them down quickly, because after this we'll be doing a very big pull with all of our cooldowns. These just jump around, there's some swirlies happening in melee, but really nothing dangerous. Overall, we found the dungeon to be quite forgiving on the timer. This is not like the other side where you're very tight on timer by the end of the run. There is not too much running here. Our route is also not optimal, so that has to be kept in mind. But overall, a relatively easy dungeon to time as long as there are no wipes to bosses, again, with the second boss being problematic, and the fourth boss being somewhat of a DPS check, but it's not that big of an issue. That previous pack melts relatively quickly and we go into this 5 pack. I just pop a shield to put it on cooldown, have a bit less healing to do, so I can focus on DPSing a bit more. Again, every point of DPS you're putting into combat speeds up the whole run, so it's very important that you contribute to DPSing. Something I've reflected on recently is that you're used to, with a certain party, you get used to certain damage patterns, and you have trust in them. You have trust that your party members will avoid certain mechanics. If you're with them on Discord, you can also communicate. If you're playing with bugs, there's very little trust for you to have in your party members, and so reliance on Shadow Mend naturally comes along, and that's where mana issues come along. And luckily, Prideful solves some of the mana issues with a massive mana regeneration after every Prideful kill, but having a stable party to play with on Discord and being able to trust one another with dodging abilities definitely helps these runs for us. For this pack, my party actually forgets to activate the Goliath, so I'm the one to do it, and I start falling behind healing a bit. I just Rapture defensively, pick up the orb. Not a problematic pack usually. Necro Bolts, I think the abilities are called, absorb a lot of healing, so ideally those are interrupted by your party, but you can also pop PI on your friend and on yourself here and just heal through it. It's not that big of an issue on non-fortified weeks. My tank picks up the orb in the corner there next to the dead Goliath, which will actually help us a lot, and you'll watch his damage spike on 2 or 3 pulls ahead. I'll point it out. This pack is a bit problematic. We like to pull both these together because we have a setup organized for kicks, and at this point I realized that we're actually going to be quite overwhelmed on Prideful, so to heal through this I like to keep Boon of the Ascended. Boon of the Ascended is pretty much, when combined with Radiance, is pretty much a party-wide immunity unless the party gets one shot. And as you can see, it really helped me stabilize at the start, so we had time to kill the pack, burst down the Prideful, and we still have some leeway on the health there. I was also lucky to have PI for the end of this pull, so that has massively helped me heal through this. And since we've killed the Prideful now, you can see my mana regen really fast. That's quite easy. A nifty trick here is to mind suit these guys. You pretty much never want to fight this pack. This pack is brutal. We haven't even tested this pack. On fortified weeks, it is guaranteed to be avoided. On Tyrannical, maybe on lower keys you could try this, but the healing requirement and the DPS requirement for that pack is just absurd. You never want to touch it ideally. These two Marauders are relatively easy. We have our Rogue is assigned to kick Fear on one of them, and our DH kicks the Fear on another one of them, so it's really easy for us. And with this pack you will see my tank use the orb that he's picked up earlier. If you watch the DPS meters now, we pull everything together and we just blow it up. He goes up to 43k DPS, he just explodes the whole pack with that thing. If you're a tank, I definitely suggest you pick up that orb, which you saw earlier. And there's going to be another one of them later in the dungeon. Regarding items in this dungeon overall, all of them are actually very useful except for the shield. The shield actually silences you and reduces your movement speed, so there's absolutely no point to using the shield in our eyes. But the Javelin does massive AoE damage to the target and on the way to the target, so to everything between. The Hammer does about 90k damage on a single target, which I actually use here to kill Skeleton Mages on the second boss. and the orb that you've seen earlier explodes for massive damage around the user. This pack is not really problematic as long as you interrupt the fear by the Marauder. It's really a non-issue, and this is where we spawn the other Prideful. Again, somewhat mismanaged Prideful. Ideally, you want to have this Prideful on the second boss, as second boss is just so problematic. But we unfortunately didn't plan this out well enough. And here I go pick up the hammer, which I saw earlier, because I know I won't be needing to heal for a while. And we finish up this Prideful. Again, not an issue with Prideful itself, but the timing of it really messes with its presence on the boss. We really ideally want to have Prideful for the second boss, at the very least. Because of our route, we actually only end up having Prideful for the first boss, and again, on Tyrannical weeks, since bosses are by far the biggest issue, that's where you want your Pridefuls to be. So I would actually recommend, say, spending some time with your group or alone with Mythic Dungeon Tools add-on and playing around with the route, seeing how you can better adjust your Prideful for the bosses. Here we just focus on Necromancer as usual. We missed some kicks on the mages. Luckily, I can mass dispel the buff they apply, the debuff rather, so it's really not an issue. Especially with Prideful, we have no problems blowing up the whole pack, and by the whole pack I mean the Necromancer. As long as you kill the Necromancer, everything else dies immediately. And this is the problematic boss. This is for us by far the hardest boss, and we actually got really lucky here. That's the only reason we had so little issues with him. We like to tank him in this corner, that way all the undead adds spawn around this corner as well. They actually spawn around the boss and not in random spaces in the room, so it's very good to eliminate a lot of space around the boss, and that way we have a much easier time kicking the mage's volleys. We start off, I PI my druid, we blow all cooldowns, we don't have bloodlust for this boss, we only have our personal cooldowns. And here the two mages actually stack up, and you just saw the javelin fly to them and they immediately die. That is the power of the javelins. That does absolutely massive damage, and you can use it on this boss to clean it. You could also use it in the Necropolis upstairs on the trash, but for us the bosses are much more difficult. And I believe the items do not work on bosses themselves, so it is very useful to use it on the ads. At this point, if any of the ads are alive, your group will just get one shot, so you need to make sure to kill them before the swirlies on the ground appear. After every absorb, he gets around a 25% damage buff, I believe. And the more ads he spawns, the bigger of a problem it will be. I see one of the mages not being controlled very well here. I knock him towards the middle. But since we missed one of the kicks, I rupture defensively in fear that another kick can go off. With the Necrotic bolts coming out on the party too, they actually absorb some of the healing taken. And at this point we luckily managed to wipe all the ads. And I believe my mage has taken a tick of the frontal there, which does massive dot damage on him. Otherwise the fight proceeds as usual. Again, once he absorbs the bodies of the skeletons, he gets an increased damage buff on him. He also enrages, which absolutely needs to be soothed by a druid, a rogue, or a hunter. And at this point we have a third set of ads, and I just hammered this one, as you saw, a 93k crit on the mage, just so that we avoid taking unnecessary group-wide damage. As you can see, my group is already quite low behind. I don't use Boon of the Ascended here, because I have trust that my group will finish up this boss. My mage procs cheat death, but we end up surviving just barely. Again, ideally, this boss is done with Time Warp and Prideful, and you'll have much less trouble with it. At this point, there's a dead Goliath to the right of my screen that was there downstairs, and behind him, there's another orb, which my tank is going to use in the Necropolis. So it's a bit more hidden this time, but you really want to pick it up. This Necropolis used to be quite problematic on Fortified, luckily not as difficult on Tyrannical. Prideful here, again, very badly managed by us. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to time Prideful for the next boss, and I don't think it's just worth it. I think it's much better to focus on having 100% by the time you're done with this Necropolis than on timing Prideful with the third boss. Prideful on the second boss is much more important in any case. Nothing very special happens on this on these packs. Flesh Crafters do Drain Fluids, I believe, and they can also restore the health of Loyal Creations, so that needs to be interrupted. Loyal Creations can actually be stunned too, so when they do their big AoE, their Rogue can stun it without any issues. Spare parts get bolstered, but do not bolster, so it's not a problem to pull them into other packs. And we just rotate around the room, cleaning the trash. Really not an issue. Again, I focus on spreading Purge the Wicked as soon as possible on all targets and just helping DPS. And that actually ends up being quite a big time boost for my entire party. So again, if there is no damage going out on the party, really do not hesitate to put some damage into the packs. Mindseer, Purge the Wicked, Smites, Penance. Penance is especially good because it spreads Purge the Wicked once. Kyrian Stitchworks have actually been nerfed quite a bit. They used to hit the tanks really hard, and they've actually nerfed that since then. They apply a Tenderize buff, so Kyrian Stitchworks are definitely the highest prior target in this pack. And the Corpse Collectors just have to be controlled. They do Drain Fluids as well, but one kick is more than enough to manage that. There are some little min-maxing tips on the next boss, and I'm really happy with how we did it in this run, so I'm gonna go ahead and focus on those a bit more. After we're cleaning the trash, I'll make sure to point them out. Just 2 trash packs left. Again, on non-fortified weeks, these are very easy. I use some defensives just, again, to be able to DPS a bit more in order to not fall behind at the same time. So there's some AoE going out, again, on Tyrannical weeks, really not a big issue. It does a big initial hit, but Dot is really weak, so you can easily heal it with Radiance and some Atonement. Spreading Purge the Wicked and everything. My Rogue interrupts Drain Fluids, controls the Corpse Collector altogether. Having a Rogue is overall very useful. Not only do they do massive damage, good rogues are also able to control 2 or maybe even 3 mobs in the entire pack. And unfortunately, if my teammates could also learn to stack on a diagonal like this, that would be really nice from the first try, but can't have everything at once. This stacking diagonal thing has really helped us out, and we're still not used to doing it in certain places, but in some other places we do a really good job with it, and it helps a lot. Nobody has to move for anything and avoid missing DPS. So this Prideful is what I was talking about. We have Prideful for this pack, which is again not an issue. We don't really need Prideful for this, but at the same time there was no way for us to do anything differently. And we will not get another Prideful until after we finish the dungeon at this point, unfortunately. But that ends up being okay. It is only a +12, and luckily with our DPS we don't have issues with the bosses so far. On a +13, 14 or 15s, optimal usage of Prideful is absolutely a must. Dungeons will not be able to be timed without proper Prideful on Tyrannical. Some bolstering stacks there, but that's not a big deal. At this point, 2 assistants appear, and here we do a really good job at eliminating those as quickly as possible. They target at a random party member with a throw, but that throw can actually hit anything. So now if you see, I am positioning behind one assistant and my mage positioned behind the other assistant, so that they throw the cleavers at each other and take out about 30% of each other's health. At this point, I pull my rogue in order to avoid fixation damage, just in order to have some safety. And after these abilities, they throw the cleavers again, and again we do an amazing job making them throw the cleavers at each other. So in total we've cut down the health of these mobs by 40% by just simply standing in the right place. I was really happy with how we did it in the run. It was really nice to hear the morale boosts too. We were just at this point we're shouting at each other about how good we are, because we've never had such good aiming in our lives before in this dungeon. It was really funny. The rest of the packs before the boss are not a problem as well. They're exactly the same as the trash before when we just entered the Necropolis. Again, just a bit of tank damage going out. I just pop the cooldowns to get through it a bit more quickly. Healing is not needed here at all on Tyrannical weeks, so you can just focus on DPSing. Prior damage on Gorgrind could be a bit better, because he can actually start one-shotting the tank with bolstering. He becomes similar to Fortified weeks at this point. But luckily, if you have a DH tank, he can easily reset the stacks, and at which point he'll start taking much less damage again. take care of this guy. There also has a frontal, which my tank takes accidentally, and the frontal does quite a bit of bleed damage, which needs to be healed. If you have melee standing in the frontal, that can be quite problematic to out-heal, but it's easily avoidable. Rot Spew just does stable AoE damage. He doesn't tenderize, he just does some spike damage to the tank once in a while through Mutilate, and some AoE damage to my whole party, which is around him. And I believe that Clown also silences, if I'm not mistaken. It's the same as from the first boss. Again, very easy pack. Spread Purge the Wicked, keep it up as best possible, top off the people who get spit on, and top off the people who take some AoE damage from Rot Spew, and it's really not an issue. There's some tricky tactics that you can do on the next boss, but on Tyrannical it becomes a bit more complicated, and I'll explain it in process. So here we start off normally. We try to put the ad a bit more in the middle, so we avoid dropping puddles between the Surgeon, Stitch Flesh, and the Creation. Naturally, you should know this by now, to position yourself with a hook, and which is what my rogue is doing there. We're just really taking it easy. He's not even DPSing the Creation. We hook Stitch Flesh out, time warp, do maximum damage to him. I have PI coming up in 2 seconds too. At this point we want to avoid killing the Stitch Flesh's Creation, but we still want to bring him down. You can still use his hook to interrupt the boss's abilities. As you can see here, the boss beacons the Fixate, but the hook pulls him out of the Fixate immediately, dealing damage to him and preventing the ability altogether. We don't do a good job slowing DPS down on the Creation, and in fact if you aim this hook right now to the boss platform, you can hook the boss out, but he dies just a second before pulling the boss out. So we just restart and do it all over again. Again, with Time Warp we just did a bit too much cleave damage on the Creation, and ideally you want to kill him right after he pulls the boss down with the hook he started when the boss was down. Again, repeat, we hook the boss down. Really not a lot to heal here if the mechanics are done properly, and this is mostly a tank fight actually, and he could, to speed up the run, he has to do a good job positioning Surgeon, because it's a bit problematic to aim the hook properly sometimes. There might be DPS in the way, so it's actually a bit easier to. We prefer to drag the boss around as opposed to dragging the hook around. A bit of damage going out here, as my rogue is standing in the puddle, I believe. Puddles start to become chaotic if the boss lasts for a while. I don't think they despawn. And here, as you actually saw, we left the Stitch Flesh's Creation alive, and he pulled the boss down as soon as the boss went up. At this point, I just decide to stand still and dodge the hook, because my tank has called me to stand still and not move. And there's some damage coming out, but the boss is at 70%, 70k HP, so we just finish him off. That's not a problem. And as you can see here, because of our route, we're actually at 92% forces, so we have no way to get Prideful, because you cannot get down from the Necropolis, and we cannot finish the enemy forces now. So we just decided to go into the last boss without anything. We saw that we're still good on time. We have 13 minutes left to clear the dungeon, and it really wouldn't be an issue. For this boss, our range likes to spread, so that way we don't have to move around at all for the chains. As you can see now, my rogue actually gets frozen, my mage blinks out, and only then I dispel him. Since nobody had cooldowns in my group, I just PI'd my rogue, who called out for it. Comet Storm absolutely needs to be avoided. As you saw there, my druid took one tick of it and went down to 50% HP. He also gets sent downstairs for that as punishment. I don't think it actually influences who goes downstairs, but that'll be funny. There's a nifty little strategy that we do when the person who goes down comes up, because when the person who goes down comes up with an angel, he has a debuff on himself, and after a certain point he will drop a big icy puddle, and if that is left in the middle of the room, that's going to become a big problem later in the fight, as the fight lasts quite a bit of time. So when my druid comes back up, I'll show you exactly what he does and what our strategy for this was. Luckily on lower keys we end up having around 3 puddles, and we position them quite well, but with fights with slower DPS, you will have much more puddles, I have a feeling. And healing here is not an issue. I'm only doing 2k HPS and my whole party stopped. but tactics can be a big issue here. And as you can see, my druid dropped the big icy puddle just in the corner, so we really maximize the space of this boss room. And again, the fight just repeats itself. There's the shield that's up, which the DPS have to go through. Comets have to be dodged. Ideally, you want to save your Solace and your Penance for moving segments like that. That's what really helps with your HPS and DPS. With Solace and Penance, you can do all of your healing on the move. Spread out with the chains, and just keep DPSing the boss. As you can see, the fight's been up for some time now. And he's only at 40% HP, because one of the DPS keeps going down. And there's movement to be done, and we have casters who have problems casting on the move. But I wouldn't want to do this dungeon with many melees, because if they get greedy and start just running around the boss, they can run into comet storms of each other. And that's pretty much an immediate death, unless you're a rogue and you can cloak it, but you only have cloak once per, 2 minutes. As you see there, the second puddle was dropped by my mage. In the same spot, and my druid is attempting something risky here. He drops the puddle inside another puddle, and we have the trust in each other that I will heal him from that. And luckily he calls it out in Discord too, so I can top him up immediately. The puddle itself doesn't do that much damage, luckily, as we've tested out here for the first time, because this is pretty much our first Necrotic wake this week. And the boss is down to 100k HP. Again, a relatively easy boss on the HPS, as long as people have things down mechanically. It is not an issue. My mage comes up again. He has to drop the puddle, but we don't really care about it anymore. The boss is dead anyway. At this point, we take the angel to go down, and we're pretty much screaming at each other in order to chest it. We only have 2 minutes. And oftentimes groups have the situation where there's one mob left to kill, but only big packs left around, and they lose all focus completely. They forget about all tactics, and they just DPS one target, don't kick anything, and the wipes happen, and that's how you miss your 2 chests, or potentially even 1 chest maybe. So here, just to be sure, I decide to pop all cooldowns, and we're AoEing for some reason, even though we only need around 1 or 2 mobs per IO. So if you just spend 1 or 2 seconds marking targets, it's gonna be so much smoother. For us, it wasn't an issue with the timer, but for some other groups, for your group, it might be. Well, that's pretty much the end of the dungeon. Thank you very much for watching. To be honest, I'm very surprised about the positive responses on YouTube. I've never expected my YouTube videos to get this many views. I'm actually very pleased to see that, and I'm really glad you guys are liking this. I plan to cover all the dungeons, ideally on both Fortified and Tyrannical weeks. That is by far the most important affix. Prideful routes are different for people, so that is something in the plans for now, but I will not be focusing on Prideful routes as of now. Tyrannical and Fortified are the main focuses, because they alone change the dungeon so much, and they actually influence where the Prideful goes up. But anyway, I want to thank everyone for supporting the YouTube channel. It's been going amazingly for me so far. I've hit 100 subs last week, and I'm on the way to hopefully hit 1000 in the beginning of next year. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to subscribe for future guides for Disciplined Priests and all the healers. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.